This party is rocking.
We are live and welcome back to Author Adventure. Liz, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great today, Russ. How are you? I
Excellent,
love
excellent.
technology. It's such a great thing. When it works, it's fabulous. When it doesn't, not so much. Kind of frustrating, but we are going to work our way through all of these things. So glad
Well,
to be here today talking author adventure.
absolutely, absolutely. And I wanted to start off Author Adventure with a little bit of some tips. I know we have some tips that we're going to be talking about today. So, do you want to get us started by sharing a few tips with us
I
today?
will. So, as you talked about here, this show is all about the art and business of publishing, and we're talking about the 5 secrets to success. And every week, we're sharing some kind of tip, some kind of secret. In our mind, there are 5 things that you need to know about on your author adventure. That's writing, that's publishing, launching, marketing, and distributing your book, your best-selling book. So that's what we're doing. And so today, a couple weeks ago, we talked about some writing strategies and secrets. And then last week, we talked about some publishing secrets. Today, we're going to talk about launching secrets. So there's 3 things that you need to consider before you launch your book, before you publish. The first one is to have a promotion plan. Create some kind of a promotional plan, how you're going to promote or market your book when you launch, okay? Because that's a really important thing. A lot of times people wait until they finish writing their book and publish, and then they start worrying about the marketing and the promotion. But you need to do that ahead of time, even if it's just a mini plan. Just a list of 4 or 5 things that you're going to do to help promote your book. The second thing is to create what we call a street team. That's 5 or 10 or 15 people that you know that like you, trust you, know you, are willing to promote your book for you. You can send them the copy, you can send them the link to Amazon or wherever you're publishing, whatever platform you're publishing on, but you want to call them ahead of time. You want to call them a month out. You don't want to call the day before you're launching your book and say, oh, will you help me promote my stuff tomorrow? Well, no, people can't do that. They've got their own agenda. They've got their own work that they're involved in. So you need to put that street team together, and you need to do that ahead of time, at least a month out, if not earlier than that, 6 weeks or so. The third is to set up a social media page. Maybe you're on social media already, but you need to be where your audience is. Wherever your audience is, that's where you want to be. So if your audience is on Facebook, maybe you need to be on Facebook. If it's a business audience, maybe you need to be on LinkedIn. If it's mothers, maybe you need to be on Pinterest. If it's younger people, maybe you need to be on Instagram or Twitter or TikTok. And you don't have to be on all of these platforms at one time, but you need to pick at least one so that you can put the link to your book wherever your book's being sold. And so you can create your book cover or maybe a picture of yourself holding your book and send that out to people and tell people why they need to be buying your book. So those are the 3 secrets for launching that we're sharing today. We'll share more secrets each week, so come back for that. But today we're just really delighted to be having our guest today. Our guest is author Mike Farris. Mike is a multi-book author. He does mostly legal thrillers because he was an attorney by trade, has retired now. But he's been writing all these years while he's been in the law business as well. And so in addition to that, he's not really retired. He retired from the legal aspect of things, but now he's teaching. So he's teaching at the university, and he can tell us a little bit about that. But today we're going to be talking about his nonfiction stories, one of his nonfiction stories, which is a current release called 40 Hours. Mike, welcome to the show.
Liz, Russ, thanks for having me.
All right. So, yeah, Mike and I have been friends for a long time. We're family friends. He's married to a lovely lady named Susan, who I've known all my life, basically, because her sister and I have been best friends since we were like kindergarten, I guess, so 50 years or more. And then when Mike married into the family, he just got stuck with all the rest of us. So, but Mike did give me my first encouragement when I was feeling really discouraged about 30 years ago. he told me not to give up on writing and not to give up on publishing and to just keep on keeping on. And one day things would happen. And he was absolutely right. So here we are today with this author live stream. But I'm going to let Russ take over now and kind of talk to Mike about his new book, and then we'll mention some of his other books toward the end, and maybe you can bring me back up, Russ, and we'll finish up with a few things.
Thank you, Liz. I really appreciate this. And so, Mike, I was going through your prolific inventory of writing, and the question that I had, and I thought about, which was maybe something you haven't been asked recently, is what is your first childhood recollection?
Oh, my first childhood recollection. My dad was a Baptist missionary to Japan. And so I lived in Japan between the ages of 2 and 7. My first childhood memories are of being on a compound of English-speaking families there in Tokyo. There were three boys my age, and I have recollection of doing things with them, playing things with them, playing cowboys, playing baseball. That's pretty much my first recollection.
And the reason I ask this is because as an author, there's typically some seed that gets planted that, or some idea that you feel like it's something that is your calling or something that you're compelled to do, especially when you've written as much as you have. And I just wanted to kind of set the stage, so to speak, to what prompted you to get into writing, and how did you involve your life goals and some of the experiences you had along the way, and how has that impacted your writing so far?
Right. Well, I became a writer because I loved reading. I loved books. I grew up on the Hardy Boys. I remember that every year for either Christmas or my birthday, my mother would take me to the Kmart in Dallas, and I could pick out a Hardy Boy book. So I grew up reading, and I grew up loving the storytelling involved in it. I did some writing when I was in school, but not a whole lot. But then when I got into law practice, I began to read legal thrillers just because that sort of went along with what I was doing, and began to realize that the cases that I worked on lent themselves to stories. And so the first novel I actually wrote was based upon a case I had that lasted for 10 years. But it was sort of drawing upon my love of reading, my love of legal thrillers, and working on a case for so long.
During the experience of writing a book, I know it's really, it can be therapeutic, it can be exciting, and also challenging. So, for authors that haven't started yet, they're looking to discover what's the best way to start. Do you have any recommendations or thoughts that you want to share with these new authors that might be just venturing out, putting their toe in the water?
Yeah, I think my best advice would be just if you have an idea for a story, just start writing it. Now, educate yourself. There are books you could read. You can go to writers' conferences and seminars, and you can learn things to refine it. But my biggest advice would be just simply start putting down something on a page. It may never see the light of day, but it's a starting point. And I have always learned with every new book that I start, starting it is sort of the priming the pump. I have ideas in my head, and they start to come out as I start to write. So it's actually the process of writing that gets me into the storytelling.
So it's almost the taking action and then allowing things to unfold for you that really kind of helps develop the story along the way.
I think that's exactly right. And then the more you do it, the more you write, the more you can sort of refine your technique. You learn to outline, you learn to structure things. But when you're getting started, the most important thing I think is just to get the word, you have stories in your head, get them out of your head and get them down on paper. And that's your starting point. That may be something that never sees the light of day, but it's what gets you going.
But it's practice. It's like any instrument. You have to get your muscle memory. You have to get your rhythm down. You have to actually allow yourself the space to think about these these topics.
You do. Something like people have asked me, do you write on a regular basis? Do you have a schedule? And my answer is always, I sort of write as the spirit moves me. When I start thinking about a story idea, I think about it for a long time, tossing things around in my head, what needs to happen, who are my characters, and you reach a point where it's time to come out of your head and get down on the page. The repetition and practice is important because I've now published 16 books, and I have realized that what it used to take me 7 or 8 revisions to do, I now do on my first or second draft. And it's just, again, it's the muscle memory. It's knowing what I'm doing, knowing how to develop a story. I still do a lot of rewriting, but not as much as I used to.
Do you typically work on one project or multiple projects simultaneously?
I typically work on one at a time.
Okay.
When I was practicing law, I had multiple cases going at once, and so you learn to sort of juggle things. But that's one of the beauties of being a writer when you're on your own schedule. I get the story out and get the story done before I'll move on to something else. Now, I may take notes. I have a file folder full of ideas. So I may jot down notes and things that come to mind, but I typically like to finish a project before I move on to another one.
Excellent. I almost get the feeling that, because you have these ideas and you capture little thoughts and, maybe, character flaws or things like that. It's a journey. Each one is its own unique journey. And throughout all of these publications, is there one that sticks out in your mind that was particularly challenging and maybe caused a little bit of grief for you at times?
Not really. There were some that were more difficult to write. I've published 2 true crime books, which were not the easiest to do because I had to do a lot of research. I had to have access to trial transcripts, to police reports. And coming from a background of being a lawyer, it's very important to me to get the facts straight. So
right.
The amount of research that went into it, I probably spent more time researching and reading materials about the case than I did actually writing it. So I guess you could say that was more difficult to do, but I had to satisfy myself that I was telling the correct story.
Well, the accuracy of that, it has to be important in the story. You have to outline the facts and the way that they're organized and just delivered. It's hats off to you. My mind doesn't work that way, so
yeah,
it's like okay.
It was sort of a natural for me. You also, I've got a good friend who's a writer who was an Air Force pilot, and he told me one time that every time he writes one of his military thrillers, he gets phone calls or emails from all around the country. You got this detail wrong, or that wouldn't happen that way, or maybe it's changed since you were in the Air Force. And so when you're aware of the fact that you will have not just a reading audience, but a critical reading audience, you particularly want to be accurate when you're telling a true story.
Yeah. I know that the genre of, crime and, some of the mysteries that are out there, it's an incredibly popular genre. And the thing that fascinates me is how some of these stories, there are twists on these stories that you just don't, you have to think that it's almost, it's not a true story. However, truth is sometimes stranger than fiction. Have you discovered that along your journey?
I have discovered that, and I don't know who said it, so I will take credit for this quote, even though it didn't originate with me, that the difference between fiction and nonfiction is fiction has to be believable. And the person who said that was responding to, somebody writes something, they put it into a novel,
yeah,
and somebody will read it and say, well, that couldn't happen. And the defense is always, well, yeah, it really did happen.
Yeah.
So you can have these bizarre twists in nonfiction, and they're real, and you don't have to defend them. But you put those same kind of twists into a novel, and people will start thinking, okay, you're just making stuff up now. You're just embellishing to tell a story.
Yeah. Expanding the story to
Yes.
to get the shock effect in there.
Right.
However, I've talked to a few authors that have been police officers as well, and some of the stories that they share are just, you have to shake your head and say, how can this even possibly happen? And they reinforce that fact. It's like telling a story is a magical process to me. And I love storytelling, and I love hearing a good story, and I love reading a great story. And that genre and true crime and that just fascinates me to no end. So I applaud you for your work and thank you for your effort and everything that you put into this. Is there anything that you're going to expand on beyond that in the future that you can see, or develop other areas of storytelling?
Not that I could think of right offhand. When things come to me that I want to write, it's not like I could pick and choose. It just sort of comes to me, and I decide, okay, that's what I want to write. So I have never sat down and actually plotted out, well, I'd like to do a historical murder mystery sometime.
Right.
If I have a story that lends itself to that, then I will write in that genre. But it's more a question of simply the stories come to me that I want to write, and then I just write it.
What's the favorite thing that you love about writing?
I like being God in my world, when it comes to writing fiction, because I get to decide what happens. I get to decide who wins. I get to decide who loses. And, maybe it's just a control freak in being a lawyer that wants you to do that. But I like being able to control things, and being a Baptist preacher's son, I have a very strong sense of right and wrong. And I want to see the good guys win and the bad guys lose. Not sure I could ever really fit into a noir, where the bad guys kind of come out, or there are no real good guys. I want good guys in my stories.
Yeah. You want the good and evil versus the unknown endings, I'm sure.
Right, I do, and just because I want good and evil doesn't mean that I don't realize that there are some gray areas.
Sure.
And even good characters, the good guys, have flaws, and so that's kind of what makes the story. We're human, and the characters need to reflect that.
Well, we're all flawed, so it's normal to have a little gray area there, and especially when you're writing some story about a character.
Right.
I really have to believe that the detail, from your law practice, is really aided in the details in the books. Do you get a lot of feedback normally, like we were talking about with the military books versus the mystery or the crime novels?
I don't get as much of that as he did, but you get some. And of course, one of the things it's kind of funny when he tells that story is because the people who critique it to him are military, but his vast audience is out there. They don't know. And so what I have to struggle with, particularly if I write a legal thriller, is I don't want to bog it down with legal jargon and legal procedure. There needs to be enough so that the reader understands what's happening, but then I keep the story moving.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a fascinating skill too, because telling a story, I was listening to a podcast the other day, or an audiobook, and they were talking about the crafting the story. And some of these podcasts, really popular podcasts, they'll record 40 hours of content and boil it down to 90 minutes of content. And it's picking and choosing what elements go in what order and how that story is crafted. For myself, just being somebody that writes a blog post or, some sort of content for social media, I just start it and I write it and, a couple of edits and I'm done with it. Do you have to go through a process of where you're changing chapter, or maybe you'll change orientation of characters, where they move and where they're coming from and what they're doing?
I do. When I first started writing, I just, I'd have a story in mind, and then I would just write the story and go forward. And what I've learned is that good storytelling sometimes is about setting up the unexpected and so the structure becomes important.
Mm.
And I've had stories where I've sort of started at the end and then gone back to the beginning, or I've started in the middle and then gone back to the beginning. I've also had stories where I reach a certain point and I had it in my head the story was going to go a certain direction, and then I realized that doesn't work. You know, these characters, I've developed the characters enough now to know that these decisions are not the decisions they would have made. And then you've got to go back and rewrite the stuff before it to set everything up. So, you know, structure is incredibly important. I typically, though, don't structure it up front. I tell my story, and then I go back and move things around to fit the structure that I need.
Mm. Yeah. I really admire, you know, great storytellers, as I'm sure you do as well. Do you have any resources that you look to and you study, or you know like the hero's journey, or you know different storytellers that you've seen in any kind of media that you admire as far as how they tell stories, or the structure of their stories, or the surprising elements in their stories?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the hero's journey and some of those things, but I learn more from reading the people who write the genres that I like to write. So I see a Robert Crace or a Michael Connelly or a Robert Dugoni, people like that, and I see the things that they do, and sometimes I see the things that they do and say, gosh, if only I could do that.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I think, well, maybe I could do that, but not exactly the way they do, but in my own style. But I pick up less from reading books about writing than I do from actually reading good writing.
That's a friend of mine who's an editor suggests every author do that. Learn from good writing. And so that's a great tip. And it's something that, you know, the author adventure that we're talking about here with Liz is we really want to reinforce this idea that there are things you can do. There's a personal journey and there's a professional journey for, you know, taking the step into becoming an author. And there's a number of different ways you can start, and there's a number of different ways you can, you know, continue to write. However, you have to find your own voice. And it sounds like that's exactly what you've done. You know, you've found some resources that you love, you enjoy the process, and you write when, you know, when you're called to write. And so it sounds like an amazing opportunity. And the number of books you have out reflects the fact that you're not getting tired of it anytime soon.
Not yet. And like I said, I have a folder full of ideas. You know, and I have one in mind that I'll start soon. I've just finished one. I always like to take a little bit of time off to sort of relax, but ready to start a new one. And I've picked it out. But sometimes the hard part is deciding if I have too many ideas in that folder, which one do I want to do next?
Yeah. Spin the wheel.
Yes.
Which one is going to come out next?
Yes.
So what's the latest project, and what are you excited about these days?
The one that I've just finished is it's called 40 Hours. When I was 9 years old, my father was in a plane crash in the big thicket of East Texas. It was a private plane. He and the pilot were the only ones in the plane. The pilot was killed in the crash. And my dad spent 40 hours on the ground with a broken back, paralyzed from the waist down, before he was discovered by Civil Air Patrol, spotted the wreckage of the plane, and a ground crew found him.
Wow.
I have information from him. I have an audio tape of about an hour and a half where he talked one time with some of his students. He was a seminary professor, about the events of the 40 hours. And so I had been thinking about it for a long time, but what I did was I basically took his story as told in that tape, other things I had heard him say and write about, and then wrote a version of what happened on the floor of the big thicket. Now I had to, you know, use some literary license because I wasn't there.
Sure.
But it was a very personal project for me. The book came out 2 weeks ago. I'm very proud of it. But it was very personal, and it was sort of a passion project.
Hmm. Anything that evolved from that story that surprised you?
No, it did, because again, I knew a lot of what had happened. Uh, when he talked about the events, he talked about the fact that he was it was a lot of introspection and self-analysis. Am I here because I have gotten out of God's will for my life? I mean, am I here on the floor of the big thicket paralyzed because
Yeah.
I took a wrong turn somewhere? So,
Mm,
I sort of picked up on that and some things that he wrote about. The one thing that I did that I particularly proud of, I didn't want it to be just a book of his thought process and his introspection. So I came up with a device of having the pilot who was killed appear to him either as a ghost, a hallucination, or maybe an angel, to
mm,
challenge him over the course of that 40 hours as he's working his way through these decisions he's made that have led him to this point in his life. And so he has a conversation with the pilot. So far, the people who have read it, particularly ones who knew the story, who knew my dad, have really liked that aspect of it, because they get to see him basically argue with somebody about the decisions he made in his life.
yeah. That's fascinating. And with you growing up in Japan, and your dad being in the situation he was with, teaching and preaching, it's really important for people to understand that, that's a struggle we all go through at different times in our lives.
Right.
Is it cause and effect? Am I here today because of the decisions I made? Well, absolutely. Are they necessarily something I can or cannot change? Well, let's take a look at it. Let's have some, reflection on what we're doing with our life, right?
Right. Right. And you get to have the discussion about, am I here because I made a wrong decision and God's punishing me, or am I here because I made the right decision? Things just happen.
Yeah.
And so I was able to work through a lot of that in my own life as I thought about his perspective there. It was in winter, in January of 1965,
Wow.
and what he must have been thinking and going through.
Yeah. I mean, that's a dangerous situation where you're not sure you're going to get out or survive, or what the next hour is going to bring.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I know that also one of the major milestones that you have in your life that really made an impact on people's lives was a journey in the legal system, and some of the wins that you've made around authors and writing. And is that something that you'd be open to share and expand on a little bit more?
Sure, I could talk about that. And I think you may be referencing the 50 Shades of Grey lawsuit
Yeah.
that I was involved in.
We may
Uh,
want to stay. I don't know how long the story is, having not heard it firsthand, but I just really want to make sure that we give you enough time to expand and share the things that are important to you, and have people realize that being an author is a journey, and there are a lot of aspects about it. So
right.
love to have you kind of maybe tap into it with a thrilling end for the next opportunity to talk with you.
Sure. Yeah, and I can sort of give it to you in a nutshell. Most people don't know it, but 50 Shades of Grey, the trilogy of books, 50 Shades of Grey, 50 Shades Darker, and 50 Shades Freed, were originally published by a small company called the Writers Coffee Shop, which consisted of 2 women in Texas and 2 women in Australia who operated as a partnership. They published it primarily as a print on demand, but also as an ebook. And because they were friends, they did everything online. They didn't really formalize their relationship, but when Random House bought the publishing rights to the books, one of the women, a woman in Australia, took the position that because there was no partnership agreement, there was no partnership, and that it was actually her company, and these other women simply worked for her out of the goodness of their heart. So when it came time to sign the contract with Random House, She signed the agreement as the CEO of the company. Instead of using the company bank account information and tax ID number, she used her personal bank account in Australia and her personal tax file number, which is like a social security number, that she gave to Random House, and then over the course of 3 years collected about $45 million in royalties and didn't account to her partners for any of it.
Wow.
So I represented a woman who lived in over near Fort Worth, Texas, in a lawsuit to establish that the Writers Coffee Shop was a partnership and that my client was a partner in the partnership and she was entitled to her share of the profits. We had a 2-week trial in Fort Worth and we got a jury verdict. Basically awarded my client $13.2 million as her share of the profits in the company. And then they appealed, the other side appealed, and we settled it on appeal. But my client was happy, I was happy with the settlement, and that's actually the last thing I did before I retired.
What a great way to retire into being an author.
It was a great way to retire. And it was an interesting case, I mean, just the circumstances of the book made it interesting. And I've told people before, my client, I actually had 2 clients who were involved in the lawsuit. And in all the years I've practiced law, I can honestly say these 2 women are the only clients I ever had where literally, if they told me something, it was true.
Yeah.
Most clients will fudge things. They'll try to deceive their own lawyers. But if one of these women told me something, it was true. And I usually could find an email or a text or something to confirm what they said. And it is a very luxurious feeling for a lawyer to go into a courtroom in front of a jury of 12 people and have confidence that they will see the client the same way you see the client, which is, I'm telling you the truth.
That's a beautiful thing, Mike.
It was great.
And what an adventure in storytelling. I mean, that a few people have heard of that story, 50 Shades of Grey. And so I suspect that will live on for a little while now. I want to share. I created a little something to share some of the books that you've actually. I hope all of the books that you've published, and that Liz shared with me some images, and I just wanted to put a little thing together. And then I want to bring Liz back on and wrap it up. And thank you tremendously for all of the work that you're doing, setting the example for other authors that haven't yet started, and also just being, a key light in this thing we call the creative process. So I really appreciate all the time and effort that you put out there, and thank you so much for joining us as well, Mike.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. I really appreciate it.
And let me just play this thing, and then I'll bring Liz back, and we'll wrap this thing up. Okay.
Yay!
Yay!
So that was cool. Well, thanks so much. Well, I just want to jump in because, Mike, we pull this down also as a podcast. So I just want to be sure that people know when you're looking for Mike Farris, it's Farris, Farris, okay, not Ferris Bueller, but Mike
Right.
Farris. You can find Mike's author page probably at www.amazon.com/author/Mike Farris. And all of his books will come up there. You obviously can just go and search 40 Hours, or you can, Wrongful Termination, or Death in the Islands. I mean, any of the titles, you can search by that as well. we'll have this copy in our description and our notes, Mike, as well. And we also do an article, a supporting article at our part of our newsletter. And Mike is graciously a guest author for that newsletter. And he's talking about the fiction piece mostly, because I do nonfiction and don't have a lot of fiction background. But this last story was a nonfiction story, and this Call Me Lucky, I guess that was a nonfiction, wasn't it too, Mike? And
Right, it was.
and then Mike does some screenwriting and stuff too, so we'll probably have to have him come back on maybe in November, December, somewhere like that, talk about screenwriting, because I know that's a passion for a lot of people, and a lot of people want to know, what do you do? And it's really it's a whole different business, even though it's tied to the story. Is that right?
Right. Happy to come back anytime. Yes.
All right. Well, that'll be great. Well, anything else you want to say, Ras? I just wanted to be sure that people got Mike's name right, and that would be on our podcast. And appreciate you, Mike, so much being here, and very interesting. Like you say, the questions that Russ had for you, and I learned a lot myself today. And I hope that people listening and watching, that you'll take this, that, you got to start with the story and go where the story leads you. And sometimes the story leads you to places you didn't know you were going.
Right.
And life's
Thank you
like
very
that
much.
too sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, Liz, thank you so much. Mike, we're checking out. And until next time, every Tuesday at 5 o'clock Central Time. And we'll see you here on Author Adventure, and follow us on social.
Thank you
so
so much.
much for being here. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.